Let me go backwards. I'm going to show you some places, and if you know where they are, you'll have a better understanding of what you're going to see. If you know where Cumnock is, if you know where Bay Breeze Seafood is, if you know where the depot is, if you know where Rose Street meets Chatham, you know where the Sanford Post Office is, if you know where the support beams are in the river across from Carolina Trace, and if you know where Bragg Street School and Miss Winger's Restaurant are, everything will fall into place. All right, this is the main street of Cumnock. That was Buzz Barbecue on the left and the church on the left. Now, just down the road, there's two coal mines. The one on this side of the deep river, just past the chicken plant, was the Egypt mine. And it's down behind that road there. Now, I took a group down there 20-some years ago. You're going to see the photographs I took that day. I've done this many times, and they wanted to see what it looked like now. Well, you can't even tell it was a coal mine, except there's some coal above the ground. So if you go down there now, this is William Smith. You see, he didn't even live to be 14. There were no child labor laws. So he was killed in one of the mine disasters. That's the Egypt store. If you were a coal miner, you could buy your essential things there. Now, everything you're looking at is gone. It's not there anymore. That's the houses where the coal miners lived. The Egypt mine, the one we're looking at now, was a shaft mine. It went down 444 feet straight down. There was no electricity. But you see those two pulleys in the middle. They were from the steam plant, and they would power the little type elevator that took the miners down. And then there was another one that brought the coal up. So there were actually two shafts, 444 feet deep. And of course, these were dug by hand. There was no equipment that could do that then. That's what a shift change looked like at the coal mine. Now remember, we're on this side of the river at the Egypt mine, which is a shaft mine. And over the years, there were any number of disasters there in which there were fatal accidents. Coal mining, as Leonard Ascall used to tell me, it took a strong back and a weak mind. That's what it looked like underground at the Egypt mine. And they started mining coal in 1859. Now, this is what it looks like just beyond that sign where I showed you. It said no trespassing. So there's absolutely nothing there now. But you'll see some of the gentlemen that were down there walking around where all that stuff used to be. And in some cases, the coal is so plentiful that you can just pick it up off the ground. Now, how did man learn that coal would burn? Well, I called Fred Flintstone, the only caveman I know, and asked him. He said we saw some above the ground and it got hit by lightning and caught on fire. So if he's telling the truth, that's how they discovered coal would burn. All right. In the 1980s, the government said we need to fill in those two shafts. They were open where you could stand on the edge and look down. So those two mounds you see are where those two shafts were filled in by a local geologist, Russ Patterson. He was in charge of that project. You'll see him on here in just a minute. When was it? 1987. So this is the shaft mine, 444 feet straight down. When Sherman was coming into Fayetteville and going to raid the arsenal, they took the stuff out of the arsenal and put it down in the coal mine. That's Mr. Russ Patterson there. His family had Patterson's Hot Dog Chili, Patterson's Packing Company, but none of the sons took it over. If you look around, you can see brick foundations where the buildings used to be. But there's really nothing out there left to see now. And we're going across the river in just a minute, and we're going to the Slope mine. So that's the group that we took down there that day, and that's what it looks like now. So now there's the Camelback Bridge on the left, which the group supports. You cross the deep river, there's a stop sign there, and you take a right to the Coal Glen to the Coal Glen coal mine, which was not a shaft mine. You rode down in a car like you see miners on TV when they're heading down into the mines. So one was a shaft mine and the Farmville was a slope mine. This is the one where 54 people died in 1925, and even to this date, that's the most horrific industrial accident in the state of North Carolina. Now, there would be no Sanford or no Jonesboro if it weren't for the coal mine, and that's what this is leading up to. That's the 1925, May the 27th, 1925. 53 people died in the explosion. That's what it looked like. Now, the explosion happened 1,500 feet from that entrance, and it took 3 to 4 days to break through where the debris was to get to the miners. That all these people were hoping they'd be alive, but none of them were. So there was no news media then, but as word spread, hundreds of onlookers came to watch and wait and see if their friends, relatives, or just curious to see if they were going to be found alive. This is the gentleman that had more children than anybody else, 7 orphans. This is the widow of Mr. Will Irk, I-R-C-K. And more photographs of the crowd. This played out over a period of 3 to 4 days.
Excuse me, is that all further now?
And there you see them riding down. And once they broke through, they brought the bodies out. Of course, they were burned terribly. And they'll be wrapped up. And they put them on a train car and took them to where the railroad house is. Now, this is what it looked like then. You see the support is supported by wood. And that's them bringing out the bodies. And again, so many people were there, they took them to where the depot, to where the railroad house stands today. The railroad house used to be on Hawkins Avenue. Now, in the 1950s, a group from Raleigh called the Raleigh Coal Company reopened it. It stayed open for a couple of years, and it just wasn't profitable because the Deep River, it goes under the Deep River, and the water was always sinking, going down into it. Now, you're going to see the man that closes it up. Once they decide, the man on the right is the father of Sanford Police Chief Ronnie Yarborough. That's where his daddy was working in the 1950s. So you can, now that's what it looks like today. Now it's on private property, so you can't go see it. It used to be Joe Dowdy's land, but now the Williams family in Montgomery County owns it. It's where they make wooden fence posts and utility poles. So there's some pumps in there where they extract some of the water which they use in the production of those poles. But you have to get permission. I've taken Scott Mason from Channel 5 and various other people there to see it, and you have to work it out in advance to be able to get in there. Now, we had a bus tour and we went up there one night about 2 years ago. So all this coal is coming out of the ground, but there's not enough people here to buy the coal. So they got to get it somewhere where the population base is, and this is going to lead to the railroads coming. If first, that's not, they didn't do the railroad first. First, to get it to where the population base is, they tried the river. That crossing right there, if you're going across Wicker Street, going to Yarbrough's Ice Cream, if you look to the right, you'll see it. The line that runs left to right, to the left of the depot, is the coal mine line, laid out by Mr. Jones. That's who Jonesboro is named for. When it passed through Sanford in 1859, there was no Sanford. That was just woods. The other line is the Colonel Sanford line, which got here February 28, 1872. Now, that line was supposed to take place in Jonesboro, but I'll tell you the story of why it didn't, and that's why Sanford grew and Jonesboro got left behind. If you know where the post office is, that's where Newton, Red, and Bryan lived. and he owned all the land right around there. So in the 1850s, when the Western Railroad, after the state said we're going to charter a railroad to go from Fayetteville to Cumnock to pick up the coal, well, he sold them the land across the street, right behind where Mr. Albert Adcock's office is now. Now, Leonard Askell died in 1999. He was the last man still living that had actually worked underground in both mines. So I spent a lot of time with him. And there's a bridge over the Deep River. They were building a new bridge, and that one gave away. This is 1911, and the entire train fell into the Deep River. Now, over to the right is Bay Breeze Seafood. So that's the railroad track. That's the Western Railroad line, which was built for one reason and one reason only, to come from Fayetteville to Cumnock to get the coal, turn around and take it back down to Fayetteville. There you see the Western Railroad running behind the First Presbyterian Church on Hawkins Avenue, and that's Mort Street on the right. So when that track was laid, if you want to see, if you're crossing Weatherspoon Street going to City Hall, look away from Sanford to the right or left, and all you see is the clearing where the tracks are. That's what that would have looked like back then. Sanford was not a place. Jonesboro had a 13-year lead on it. Now that's the crossing. The one running this way is the Western, and the one coming straight is the Colonel Sanford. And if that crossing had been in Jonesboro, there'd have probably never been a Sanford. And it was supposed to be in Jonesboro. That's the Western Railroad line. That's Chatham Street on the right, where it meets Rose Street. Of course, that line went dormant in 1971. And there you see Mr. Adcock's office at the left. He's sitting right over there. So if N.R. Bryan lived where the post office is, when he didn't know about trains, he just knew the fact that trains were progressive. So he sold that land to the Western Railroad. What he didn't know that when the train came by, if the wind was blowing just right, the ash and the cinder floated over and upset his wife with the clothes on the line, and the noise upset the chickens, the cows, and the pigs. So many a time he and Miss Pramila said, I wish we'd have never sold that land to that railroad. And he's going to come back into the story in a few years. Now, Rose Street has its name because that was the name of his plantation, the Rose Plantation. So when they were naming those streets in the 20s, they knew that. So Newton, Red, and Bryan owned everything all the way back to past Kendall Shopping Center. Now, that's the support beams where the Western Railroad crossed the Little River down across the street from Carolina Trace. And it went dormant in 1971. So Colonel Jones, now you see this map. Shortest distance between two lines is a straight point. So in the 1870s, when Colonel Sanford and they're getting ready to start the Raleigh-Augusta Railroad, they wanted the giant line to cross at Jonesboro. But N.R. Bryan didn't want one on each side of his house. He'd had one where Woodland Avenue is, and he'd had ash and cinder coming from both sides. So he made the price of the land so high that Major John Scott, who was buying the land, went back to Raleigh and said, we can't deal with Bryan. We're going to have to change our route. When you go under that underpass, the reason it's there is because it could not continue on the route that it wanted to continue because N.R. Bryan owned the land. But his brother, who lived out near Dreamland Trailer Court, sold him his land. So that's the reason that Sanford is where it is, because of that crossing. Now, that's the man that was buying up the land. That's Major John Scott. If you've been here a long time and you remember Mary Scott Gurley at the library, that was her granddad. Now, he was much younger than that when he first came here. All right, Bragg Street School. There are two streets across the street from Bragg Street School. One of them is named Scott Avenue for Mr. Scott. The other one is going to be named for another man, and I'm going to tell you that story, but I won't have time to tell it to you while you're here. For Mr. John B. Matthews. John B. Matthews lived out near Buffalo Church, and he was, remember this was Moore County, he was a Moore County tax collector and a magistrate. So I'm going to tell you why those two streets got their name. Now, Sanford didn't have a depot. The train got here the first time from Raleigh, February 28, 1872, but there weren't enough people to justify building a building. So they had an old freight car they used as the depot. And you'd wait at the back of the railroad house. That's where you bought your ticket. That's the depot that was there from 1886 to 1910 when the current depot was built. That water tank, anytime you see that water tank in a photograph, is made between 1901 and 1954. That's where the railroad house sits now. So on the left was the Western Railroad, on the right. Now the first photo you didn't have any utility lines, and that one you did. So if you were coming through Sanford before Colonel Sanford got here, that's what it looked like. This is a view if you go down Fields Drive and look either towards Sanford or away. That's what you see now. When the railroad came through, they just got enough land to lay their track and have some right-of-way. Now, once the train got to Jonesboro in 1859, they started tapping the trees for tar and turpentine. The Tyson Jones Buggy Factory in Carthage started bringing their stuff here. Landlear Drive is where N.R. Brown's brother lived. Of course, it didn't have that name then. The house is still there. Of course, it's got vinyl siding on it now, and it doesn't look anything like it did. But when N.R. wouldn't sell the land, he sold the land. So the route took a completely different route, and the crossing came at Jonesboro. It was what is now Sanford instead of Jonesboro. Now, in 1974, Hal Seiler called the people that lived there. We wanted to go look at the house, but they wouldn't let us. All right, Jonesboro, that's the intersection of Lee Avenue and Main Street. When Colonel Jones left Fayetteville coming this way, he put a depot at Jonesboro because he said it was the highest point on the railroad between Fayetteville and Cumnock. That's a view looking towards Tramway. That's the Baptist church on the right, and the Methodist church was on the left. Now, this is the reason they wanted to form a new county years later, because they got tired of making this multi-hour trip to Carthage. And I'll get to that story, and that's the same street today. So from 1859 till about 1876, 1880, somewhere through there, Jonesboro was the largest town in Moore County. Now, that's the Jonesboro Presbyterian Church. It was built in 1888 and demolished in 1998. And that's the Jonesboro Leader. And in the background, you can see the steeple of the Jonesboro Church. That building would be torn down and the church would buy it and put the fellowship hall there, which was my studio up until about 2 years ago. But Jonesboro was an up-and-coming place until they missed out. Now, that's the Simon Buchanan house. Right now, the city's got these people in court. The judge has given us the order to demolish it, but they appealed it. Now, that's what it looked like about 25 years ago today. That's where Simon Buchanan lived. Simon Buchanan opened the first bank in Jonesboro, built the first tobacco market, and had a business, and he built a 22-room hotel. Now, that's what the house looked like maybe 10 or 12 years ago. It looks worse than that today. There's nobody living in it. That's the Birches, which Simon Buchanan built. And this won't stay up here long enough for me to tell you the story, but I will when this comes to an end. That's another view of it. If you turn down Lee Avenue off Horner Boulevard, on the right-hand side, there's a large area on the right where there's no houses. That's where this was. If the house looked better, I could have gotten a historical marker for it, but I'd be ashamed for the archives to come and see that house and ask for a marker. Now, we don't have any photographs of Colonel C.O. Sanford. We don't know what he looks like. That's Colonel Leon Jones. Now, all these guys were colonels in the Civil War, the war between the states, or railroad companies call it the national conflict. There's an older Colonel Jones. He is going to marry N.R. Bryan's daughter. And there he is with his family. He kept a diary every day, so we know a lot about him. We don't know that much about Colonel Sanford. He's buried at 634 at the Laurel Grove Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. Colonel Bryan's house is still in Jonesboro, but it's been moved and it doesn't have the porch on it anymore. Now that was behind, if you know where Man's Hardware used to be, that's where the depot was. The building on the left was the Jonesboro Town Hall, and the building on the right was the Jonesboro Depot. And the railroad, of course, as it changed, it went through three different names. When you start researching these railroad records, it takes forever to keep track. Now, Major Scott built this hotel at Lemon Springs, but the Lemon Springs, not the community, but the actual springs, was nowhere near Greenwood School. This is the road going US 1 south, and that's where you turn right to go to Carthage. That's where the Lemon Springs were. And this is Jimmy Cox. He's been dead maybe 20 years. He was a county commissioner, researched and found the Hunt Springs. The Hunt Springs were out there near St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, so on the Jonesboro side. And ads during that period would say, come bathe in the therapeutic waters of the Lemon Springs, and it'd give you all the things it cures. This is where Mr. Sewell lived. There's a Sewell Street where the veterinarian office, it used to be Dr. Settle. Sam Womble was probably the last man still living that ever went to that house, and he died about 10 or 12 years ago. This is Major Scott's family. AAF Sewell's family. Ashton Ashley Flowers Sewell, and there he is. So I'm going to tell you his story in a few minutes. And that gets into the county division. All right, there were 3 attempts to form a new county. The first time they were going to call it Williams in honor of Governor Benjamin Williams, who's buried at the house in the Horseshoe and was governor during the Revolution. And then they had Jefferson. This is who Lee County should have been named for, Mr. D.E. McKeever, and I'll tell you that story. This is a story about a convention at Carthage in 1906. And these are some of the houses that stood in Jonesboro. That one, of course, a lot of them are gone now. But the architecture was really stunning. That's Trade Street. You can see the house at the very end. It's a real estate office. And I'm going to show you what it looked like years ago. Trade Street was the main street until the fire. Everything, that's Trade Street back then. In the middle, you can see the house is still there. It was the Dalrymple house. And Jonesboro was a big cotton producer, and that's bales of cotton getting ready to be shipped. If you know where San Lee Security is, that's it under construction on the left, the back of Trade Street. The post office is, Jonesboro Post Office, the next building on the left. After the fire, things switched over. This is now CUOC. It used to be O'Connell's Grocery. But after the fire, Main Street switched over there. That building is still there. It was part of Avett and Thomas. It was called the Watson Building. You'll see the back of it today. It's covered with vinyl siding. That's it on the left there. But Trade Street was the main street until the fire, and then they moved it north a couple of hundred feet. And this is a parade coming down that street in 1912. The building on the right is the back of San Lee Security, and that's what it looks like today. Well, this was before streetscape, so the streets have been modernized and the telephone pole lines are down. This is Lee County. We're one of the youngest counties, but not the smallest. So we got 155 square miles. Chowan's the smallest. You can see it. This census in Moore County. Jonesboro was the largest town in Moore County in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And this was the Jonesboro Lyles Cotton Company, where you'd sell your cotton. Link Boykin constructed that building. And that's a view of Main Street. The house that you see at the top left would be demolished. Lee Avenue used to end there. And these are some business cards from Jonesboro during that heyday period. So it was a thriving place until the railroad bypassed them. The Barnes Hotel, it stood across from where the Jackson or the Sewell house is, and Jesse James spent the night there. So these last few are just photos of business cards from Jonesboro. So, Terry, will you unplug this for me? No, from the floor, over here.